I'm Mr. Beat. How are you? What have you been up to today? Oh, neat. I've heard about that. The world is going to end really soon.
We moved the clock forward, the closest it has ever been to midnight. It is now 90 seconds to midnight.
See, I told you the world was going to end soon. Wait a second. They're still standing there. Hello? Well, that's kind of creepy. Anyway, that's the Doomsday Clock, a symbolic metaphor that represents how likely it is that a human-made worldwide disaster will kill us all. The closer it is to midnight, the closer we are to that actually happening. Members of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists have been revealing how close we are to global destruction going back all the way to 1947. That year, they revealed we were 7 minutes to midnight, and as you can see on this graph, it's gone up and down ever since. Oh, wow. The 1990s were great. Maybe all that nostalgia I have for that decade is justified after all. In fact, in 1991, it was the furthest from midnight we've ever been. 17 minutes. Wow. So why was it so far back from midnight back then? Well, that was right after the United States and Soviet Union signed the first Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the biggest weapons reduction treaty in world history. It ultimately resulted in the removal of around 80% of all nuclear weapons in existence. Well, that's a start. Get it? Yeah, START were the initials of the treaty. And listen here, buddy. We don't want nuclear weapons to be dropped. Like, ever. What is a nuclear weapon, you ask? Oh. I thought you asked that. You didn't? Well, I'm gonna tell you anyway. A nuclear weapon is a gigantic bomb created from the release of nuclear energy. This is caused by either nuclear fission, or splitting the nucleus of an atom, or nuclear fusion, or the combining of subatomic particles. Nuclear weapons have only been used in warfare twice in world history, both by the United States, both during World War II, which just so happens to be when nuclear weapons were also first tested. One was dropped over Hiroshima, Japan, and another over Nagasaki, Japan. Just those two bombs killed hundreds of thousands of people, and they ultimately caused Japan's government to surrender in the war. Since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, governments have dropped nuclear weapons more than 2,000 times, believe it or not. Oh, but hey, don't worry. They did it for testing and demonstration purposes only. And they dropped these bombs far away from where people actually lived. I mean, no one was around when they dropped these bombs. Okay, a few people were around where they dropped the bombs, but they kind of knew what they were getting themselves into. Yeah, a lot of people got cancer from these tests, actually. Fallout from these tests may be responsible for as many as 690,000 American deaths alone. What? Today, there are an estimated 12,500 nuclear warheads still in existence. Around 90% of those nukes are owned by either the United States or Russia, or what's today left of the former Soviet Union. Other countries that still have nukes are the United Kingdom, France, Pakistan, India, China, Israel, and yay, North Korea apparently has 30 nukes. Great googly moogly. Props to South Africa for being the only country in the world to develop nuclear weapons and later dismantle all of them. Now, as if you weren't already freaking out already at this point in the video, I'm now going to probably further increase your anxiety because the bombs that exist today are far more powerful and destructive than the two nuclear weapons dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. the Russians dropped the largest bomb in history on October 30th, 1961. It was called Tsar Bomba. That's Russian for King of Bombs. They dropped it way up here, far from human settlement, and thank goodness for that because, according to some estimates, it was more than 3,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It created a nuclear fireball hotter than the sun, 2 miles wide. The blast caused windows to shatter 500 miles away. Oh my gosh. Witnesses could see the flash of the explosion 600 miles away. Even being 50 miles away, you'd get third-degree burns from it. It would have easily destroyed Los Angeles. Oh, and I don't mean just the city of Los Angeles. I mean greater Los Angeles. If a bomb the size of Tsar Bomba exploded over Los Angeles, I estimate that up to 18 million people would be killed from both the blast and the radiation caused by it. You heard that correctly. One bomb killing 18 million people. Now, the fear is that if one government were to ever use a nuclear weapon, the government of the country hit by one would retaliate. The next thing you know, it could spiral out of control. Nukes dropped everywhere, and we're all dead. This fear was the fear that was everywhere during the Cold War. Come on, you already know what the Cold War is. Remember, it's so easy that my kid brother can define it.
Cold War was a state of political hostility that existed between the United States and their allies, and the Soviet Union and their allies.
People were so afraid of getting hit by a nuclear weapon during the Cold War that they built fallout shelters and told students to hide underneath their desks if a nuke was coming down. Wait, what the heck? Why the heck? Okay, yeah, that definitely isn't going to protect y'all from a nuke, okay? What are you even doing? Anyway, the end of the Cold War in 1991 got rid of much of those fears of nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, though, the Doomsday Clock has been headed straight for midnight ever since. In recent years, the threat of nuclear war has returned, and it hasn't been the only thing the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists have been worried about. They've also said the lack of support for taking action in response to climate change has led to the Doomsday Clock being closer to midnight. As you saw earlier, the Doomsday Clock is currently at 90 seconds to midnight. Whoa, they're still standing there. Okay. Anyway, what caused it to move closer to midnight than it's ever been? The Russian invasion of Ukraine that began in February 2022, which, in their view, increases the risk of nuclear escalation as Russia has stopped destroying its nukes. Not only that, North Korea has continued talking trash about dropping nuclear weapons. But the thing is, there were times in recent history in which the Doomsday Clock arguably would have been at like 1 second to midnight. We just didn't find out about it until later on. And that's what this video is about. Here are 3 times the world almost ended. But before the world ends, before we get into 3 times the world almost ended, let's talk about data brokers. Data brokers are stealing your personal information and selling it. And that's kind of messed up. In fact, data brokers are increasingly putting you at risk of identity theft and stalking by putting your personal information all over the web so almost anybody can see it. Well, fortunately, there is a solution to this that I recently discovered.
Delete me.
Delete Me, a service I trust to keep your personal information private. Delete Me removes your personal information that's being sold online. Their privacy experts remove you from hundreds of data brokers all year long. Delete Me sends you personalized privacy reports showing what they found, where they found it, and what they deleted. I've been using it and they've already scrubbed my personal information from all kinds of sites. Get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans by going to joindeleteme.com/MrBeat and use code MrBeat at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/MrBeat, code MrBeat. Hey, thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video.
Okay.
Here are 3 times the world almost ended. Well, for humans, at least.
Freaking humans.
It all started after the United States repeatedly tried to secretly overthrow Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba, an island country pretty close to the United States. Well, it failed to overthrow him, but instead just made Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, angry, as Cuba was an ally. Khrushchev decided to hide some nuclear missiles on the island. Well, this made the United States, led by President John F. Kennedy, pretty freaking nervous, you could say, since those missiles were directly pointed at the United States and could reach American cities pretty quickly, I might add. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade that surrounded Cuba. He demanded the immediate removal of the nuclear weapons. He also told Khrushchev that any attack on the United States from Cuba would trigger nuclear retaliation against the Soviet Union. But Khrushchev didn't budge, and this led to a really tense standoff. The whole ordeal later became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was during this tense standoff on October 27th, 1962, when an American spy plane was shot down by a Soviet missile. On that very same day, an American naval ship dropped an underwater bomb on a Soviet nuclear submarine off the coast of Cuba. The Soviet commanders in the submarine, who couldn't communicate with other ships since they were so deep, assumed that war had already begun and they prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. However, all three commanders on board had to agree to move forward with the launch. Two of them agreed to launch the nuke. One of them did not. Whew. The naval officer who prevented the nuclear torpedo launch was Vasily Arkhipov. There's a strong argument to be made that Arkhipov almost single-handedly prevented World War III from starting on that day. Seriously, this one man basically saved the world. And he never even got a Nobel Peace Prize for it. Anyway, the crisis ended the next day after Kennedy agreed to remove a bunch of missiles near the Soviet Union in exchange for Khrushchev removing all the missiles in Cuba. In the early 1980s, relations were once again particularly tense between the United States and the Soviet Union. Things were so tense, in fact, that the Soviets shot down a passenger plane that had accidentally flown into prohibited airspace. The Soviets assumed it was an American spy plane. Oops. But it's understandable why the Soviets might think it was an American spy plane, okay? You see, for the previous 2.5 years, the United States kept messing with the Soviets. They'd repeatedly fly bomber planes directly toward the Soviet Union, only to turn away from Soviet airspace at the very last moment. 3.5 weeks after this, on September 26, 1983, a lieutenant colonel of the Soviet Air Defense Forces named Stanislav Petrov got reports that 5 nuclear missiles were headed toward the Soviet Union. However, Petrov suspected it might be a false alarm based on the fact that he had been told an American nuclear missile strike would likely mean lots of nuclear missiles would all come at the same time, not just 5. He decided to wait to respond, waiting for a confirmation of a nuclear attack from alternative sources. Well, that confirmation never came. Petrov's instincts were right. It was a false alarm. A later investigation proved that the Soviet satellite warning system malfunctioned. If another dude might have been in his place, it's very possible that he would have freaked out about nukes heading the direction of the Soviet Union, and in turn, that would have led to retaliation, which could have caused World War III. So again, props to another guy who basically saved the world. Before he died in 2017, Petrov won several awards and even was featured in a documentary about his level-headedness during those tense moments. The next time the world almost ended was, believe it or not, just over a month later. First of all, let me review what NATO is, although I do have an entire video explaining what NATO is. No, NATO. NATO is an acronym that stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance of 31 European and North American, mostly democratic countries, formed in 1949 to unite against the Soviet Union and communism in general. By the early 1980s, NATO forces were regularly conducting military exercises that simulated a Soviet attack. Basically, they were practicing for war. On November 7th, 1983, these military exercises included new stuff like coded communication, radio silences, heads of government getting involved like President Ronald Reagan, and even airlifting 19,000 American troops in Europe. Well, this got the Soviets' attention all right. They began to think that NATO forces might be doing all of this as a distraction while they actually planned a real nuclear attack. The Soviet military mobilized, and Soviet nuclear-capable aircraft was prepared to launch, man. Since the Soviet Union believed its only chance of surviving a NATO attack was to preempt it, it wouldn't have taken much for them to attack. Fortunately, that never happened. After the NATO military exercise ended on November 11th, Soviet forces stood down. 9 days after this close call, more than 100 million people watched a made-for-TV movie about a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union called The Day After. Much of it is set in my hometown of Lawrence, Kansas, by the way. The movie arguably played a pivotal role in easing tense relations between the United States and the Soviet Union, and literally changed President Reagan's mind about how the Cold War was going. After that, he changed his tone with the Russians, calling for the reduction of nuclear weapons. One crazy thing to think about is as you watch this video right now, or listen to this video right now, I understand that many of you don't like to look at my face, but anyway, as you consume this video, at this very moment, somewhere in the world, it's entirely possible that a nuclear weapon is about to be launched, but someone stopped it. Someone prevented that from happening. Do you realize this? A nuclear weapon almost possibly got launched just now. And we won't find out about this for a long time. If that nuke does get launched though, thank you for watching and liking this video. I guess that doesn't matter much anymore though, does it? I guess it's all over for all of us. But anyway, yeah, my point was that you likely wouldn't know about it until much later. That's because the good people of the world who are trying to protect all of us from global catastrophes don't want to cause mass panic. Simply put, the fine folks from around the world who day in and day out protect our butts from nuclear disaster are heroes. If you're one of those fine folks watching right now, thank you. Thank you for preventing the end of the world. We all owe you a drink at the very least. I don't know, maybe this is all just a simulation. You know, there were other close calls. For those interested, Wikipedia has a comprehensive list of every nuclear close call in history that we know of. Keep in mind that the vast majority of stuff on the list was just accidents. Accidents in which we were lucky a nuke didn't explode. By the way, I highly recommend this book, Command and Control by Eric Schlosser. It goes into 3 of those nuclear close calls. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters and channel members. One perk that they all get is they get early access to videos, so that's pretty cool. And if they donate at least $15 or more each month to my channel, they get another perk. And that's a monthly shout out at the end of a video. And that's what I'm gonna do right now. Starting with my biggest donors and in reverse order alphabetically. Thank you to Trevin Jones, Sean Connett, Robert Candell, Psycho, Patrick Stewart, Pat Iapicca, Nick Everett, Nicholas Dronsky, Neo R14, Michael Cortez, Joe Cook, Jesus Carrillo, Jeremy Dunham, Isaiah Warfield, Isabel, Fletch Fick, Empty Machine, Dr. Paul J. Lilly, Derek Williams, quote, Defender of Communism, Corey Ryman, Austin Ciros, Anthony Beckett, Andrew B., Alvino V., Alicia Solberg, Zachary F. Parker, Thomas Oppenheim, Stephen Eisen, Steve Bryan, Stacy, Salty, Raquel Jones, Oliver E., Naderade, Michael Shiloh, Michael Burt, Justin Love, Jules Gringus, Joel Serrano Lozada, Jennifer, Jacob Birnbaum, Jacob Ginsberg, Jack L., Eric Hernandez, Emily Glover Wilson, Shums McGuffey, Andrew Snyder, Aditya Anand, and Adam Christian. Thanks for watching. Hopefully the world doesn't end before this video comes out.